Hi everyone, welcome to our amphibian behavior and reproduction video. By the end of this video, you will be able to explain the different modes of reproduction and life cycles of amphibians, describe specific reproductive strategies of frogs and salamanders, explain the following behaviors as they relate to amphibians: parental care, feeding behavior, and defense and escape mechanisms. So amphibian reproduction, there's kind of three different ways that eggs can develop. They can develop aquatic, so in the water. Eggs are deposited in the water and they develop in the water. Semi-terrestrial is when eggs are deposited outside of the water, but the larvae develop in the water. So here it might be that the eggs are laid on a leaf, and when they hatch, they fall into the water and develop in the water. There is fully terrestrial development where the eggs are deposited on land and they develop on land. And this we see in species that are fully terrestrial. It's generally in a very moist environment so that the eggs don't dry out. And generally, instead of having the aquatic juvenile phase and adult terrestrial phase, these hatch as like mini adults and just develop into adults just by growing. There's not the big metamorphosis. So we see that in the lungless salamanders. Here are some examples of the different life cycles that we see in amphibians. So anurans, frogs and toads, they start out as an egg, hatch into a tadpole. The tadpole develops. Sometimes it takes up to 2 years for a tadpole to develop. Legs grow. This is all aquatic, right? And then the adult loses the tail. We have an adult frog here. And depending on the species, may move more or less to land, but they're able to survive out of the water at this stage. I'm going to skip this one and go over to the salamander life cycle, where eggs are laid in egg masses. These are really neat, like gel, gloppy gel egg masses. They're fun to find. Hatch into aquatic larvae, where you see the external gills. The salamander larvae do have legs. Then they transition to terrestrial adults without the external gills. Now the newts, so on our list, the red-spotted salamander, have an extra stage. So the start is eggs, they then transition to gilled larvae, so kind of similar to other salamanders. But then there's the red F stage. This is fully terrestrial, and they do not mate as Fs. Then transition to aquatic mating adults. So it's just kind of an extra step in the newt life cycle. Paedomorphosis is the retention of larval characteristics. So you see this here, where if you have an adult that maintains a juvenile characteristic like external gills, that's paedomorphy, or a paedomorphic characteristic. So we see that in Neuse River water dog with the external gills. Hellbenders have some of those, some juvenile characteristics because they stay in water. And then one kind of exception to the normal rule, ambystamids, they have their egg stage, then they have their aquatic larval stage. Sometimes they're able to actually breed in this larval stage, depending on environmental conditions. So that's a possibility, but generally the breeding happens in that adult stage. So specifically, how do salamanders reproduce? Courtship happens with pheromone signals. So salamanders cannot vocalize the way the anurans can. So pheromone signals are chemical signals sent out that can be detected within a species. And we talked about those, the nasolabial grooves on some salamanders, and sometimes even the cirri that can receive those chemical signals. For aquatic species, the breeding season is shorter because it requires the body of water. So Ambystoma are explosive breeders, which means it happens pretty much all at once when there's plenty of water. Males come and deposit spermatophores. These little white things are spermatophores. They deposit them in temporary ponds. So that means bodies of water that will dry up. Why would they do it in a body of water that'll dry up? Because there are not predators in those bodies of water. So they lay the spermatophores in these temporary ponds. Females come and so there's really not courtship. They might not ever even see each other, the male and the female. The females can pick up spermatophores through their vent, and they can pick up multiple spermatophores. So in one clutch of salamander eggs, you could have multiple fathers per se. Terrestrial species have a longer breeding season. There's not that urgency. There's water, we need to get this done now. So in Plethodonidae, we have prolonged breeders. Male and females generally have territories. The male territories do not overlap. One female's territory, female territories can be pretty big. One female territory may overlap with several male territories. So one female may breed with multiple males. Frogs, things are a little bit different. Instead of pheromones, they're using acoustic signals. So they're frog calls, right? And those are used to call in mates. Amplexus is a behavior specific to frogs and toads, kind of the frog hug, if you will. You can see it here. It's when the male grabs the female in a copulatory embrace, so that as the eggs are being deposited, fertilization can be happening, and the male frog can be relatively certain that it is his sperm that are fertilizing the eggs because of that amplexus. Again, there's explosive breeding and prolonged breeding. Explosive breeding we see in toads and Bufonidae. This is it when water is scarce, or if the water that's being used has abundant predators. So they just want to, all right, get it done all at once. This is called a breeding ball. In Bufonidae, we see those where multiple males will link up with one female, and as she deposits eggs, they'll all deposit sperm. So in one kind of egg strand, Bufonidae lay eggs in double strands. So you've got this double strand of eggs, and different eggs that are right next to each other might be fertilized by different males because of this breeding ball. And then prolonged breeding we see in Hylidae. This is where females kind of get the choice. So males will call for weeks really, and females will be drawn in and pick the call that sings to them most. And again, that's in areas where water isn't as scarce, or it's more of a temporary pool. Parental care. So not all amphibians exhibit parental care. It's certainly more common in terrestrial species and more common in salamanders. So some of the things that happen are egg guarding, where, especially if it's on land and the eggs are laid like in moss, like in the picture earlier, the adult salamanders might hang out near there and kind of try to guard them. Moistening or aerating eggs, so ways to keep the eggs from drying out, and they could even transport eggs if it's thought that they were in danger. Other amphibians outside of those that are on our list have some pretty wild adaptations for parental care. This is carrying eggs on the back, or carrying juveniles like in a pouch in the mouth, tadpoles on the back. none on our list do anything like this, but this is kind of the egg guarding that some salamanders exhibit. As far as feeding behavior goes, frogs and salamanders feed mostly on insects and invertebrates. So there's two different approaches to foraging. Sitting and waiting, that's kind of ambush foraging. So just sit where you are, wait for something to come along, and then eat it. Or opposite to that is active foraging, or also called wide foraging, where the animal is actively seeking out prey. And you can kind of see the pluses and minuses of each. Sit and wait doesn't take as much energy. Just hang out. When you see something to eat it. But if there isn't an abundance of prey, that might not ever work out. You might end up being pretty hungry. And so it might be worth putting in the energy to go out and find the prey. For prey detection, there's some different ways that happens in amphibians. It can be visual detection, chemical detection, tactile detection, and even thermal cues. So for visual, that sight, right? Chemical is more detecting, the kind of like the smell of things. Tactile is touching. So for prey capture, that projectile tongue that we see in many amphibians comes in handy. Remember, most anurans, their tongue is attached at the front, so they flick it out, stick onto the prey, and then bring the prey way back in the back of their mouth. There's limited food processing in the mouth of any amphibian. There aren't well-developed teeth, and so most prey items get swallowed whole. In addition to eating, there's also the being eaten side. So amphibians are common prey items for other vertebrates. So there's some defense mechanisms and escape mechanisms used by different amphibians. One of those is cryptic coloration. That's when the coloration of the animal resembles that of the environment. So you see gray tree frog here blending in very nicely with its surroundings. Example in a salamander here. Disruptive coloration is when the coloration isn't uniform, like there's irregular edges. And what happens then is it makes it hard for some predators to see kind of the outline of the animal, and it makes it harder for them to be captured as prey. There are some animals that have what's called polymorphism, the ability to change color, and that can help them blend in, kind of help them toward cryptic coloration. There's also warning coloration. Talked about this before, where it's indicating toxicity, and so deterring predators. And then for escape, there are some frogs that can basically glide almost like a flying squirrel, where they can kind of launch and glide tree to tree. And you can imagine how if there was a predator pursuing a frog and they could just jump and glide away, that could be pretty helpful. So go back and make sure that you're able to explain the different modes of reproduction and life cycles of amphibians, that you can describe specific reproductive strategies, and explain parental care, feeding behavior, and defense and escape in amphibians. All right, leave you with a joke. What kind of shoes do frogs wear? Do you know? Open-toed. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in class.